happening right now, because ideally, one of the many aspects of readiness is to being able to create immune readiness as well.
Thank you very much, Margaret. If you can stay with us in case afterwards there are other questions. I'd like now to go to our friend of the refugee agency. Boris is with us, and he has brought us one of his colleague, Angele Tikonge Antangana, who is the UNHCR representative in Kinshasa, to tell us about the situation of refugees there. So, Boris, I don't know if you want to say something, otherwise I'll go to Angel directly.
Thank you so much, dear Alessandra. Good morning to everyone. Yes, I think let's go directly to Angel. She's one of UNHCR's most experienced officials on the African continent. She has more than 28 years of United Nations experience. Let's go directly to Angel. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, all. And thank you for having me on this briefing. I really want to express special concern at the continuing worsening of the humanitarian, especially displacement situation in DRC. Recently, we have witnessed a conflict in the Maidombe. Are you hearing me?
No, I'm asking to have more volume in the room because we can't hear you very loudly. I think it's here, don't worry. Oh, that's better. No, go ahead, please.
All right. Since July this year, we have been having an intercommunal conflict in the Maidombe province, which is just more than 200 kilometers from Kinshasa. And the peculiarity is that this has been a province which has been pretty calm, free from violence, unlike the eastern part of the country, and therefore has no real setting for humanitarian interventions. Recently, there have been close to 30,000 persons displaced due to intercommunal clashes between the Teke and the Yaka community. In addition, there have been 2,600 Congolese from this DRC who have sought asylum to the Republic of Congo, which is just across the river Congo. The trick is that definitely the clashes are causing not only displacement, but also killings. Some 70 people are recorded to have died, and the violence is witnessed as is being qualified as really not having been seen before by the highest authorities of this country. Humanitarian have gone there, UNHCR and notably the Human Rights Office here in Kinshasa have gone to do an assessment, and the needs are really appalling. They are in need of virtually everything. We, UNHCR, are able to gather some tarpaulins to do some emergency shelter, and we probably will also gather some non-food items for the basic needs. But definitely there is need for food, there is need for water, there is need for sanitation. Everything is needed there. The problem is also that the Kinshasa or DRC is a very underfunded crisis or a very underfunded situation. Of the 225 million that we needed in 2022 to cover the needs of the 521,000 refugees who we have in the country, and close to more than 5 million and a half displaced persons, we have only been able to gather 40%. On the other side of in Congo, the other Congo, where they are receiving new refugees, they also have managed just 16% of the 37 million that they needed to cover this year. So the crisis is really posing an additional alarm, an additional challenge on the humanitarian situation on this part. And my call is really to the international community to further assist the humanitarian community here in the country to indeed meet the needs, the basic needs of these people who are being displaced, and indeed support the effort of this country to put an end possibly to this additional crisis, because the suffering is really too much. I saw through my colleagues who went there, we saw households of 77 persons using one toilet, and you can only tell, I'm happy that who is right there online and was listening and would eventually listen to this. There is definitely a risk of a pandemic or epidemic developing from this situation. There are 6,500 persons in one site, and they are using 3 toilets only out of 9 that should have been available at a minimum. So really, I would pause here, and I would be listening for any question. I would be answering any question that anybody might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angel. And just for our correspondent, Boris has already sent the notes of what has just been said. So we have a first question from Agnes Pedrero, who's our correspondent to AFP. Agnes?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking my questions. In fact, it's a question on the notes that have been sent, because the notes say that more than 142 people have been killed. And if I have listened well during the intervention, you talked about some 70 people who have recorded to have died. So I wanted to know if you could let us know which figure is the correct one. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Angel, can you clarify?
Definitely. Definitely the figure of the note is more accurate, because the figure I was giving you was basically on the debriefing that I had from my colleagues. And they are going back there, other missions are going back to the field to have a fulsome picture of the situation. So these figures are increasing as the day go by. So the 142 should be the accurate figure. Over.
Thank you very much. Antonio is our correspondent, Antonio Broto, our correspondent from the Spanish news agency, Angel. Antonio.
Antonio.
Good morning. I would like to know if this conflict on land has any link with the international situation, the food crisis, the rise of prices of cereals. Is there something related with all that we are listening in the news or in other countries? Thank you.
Angel?
Thank you for the question. Yes, thank you for the question. No, that I know of, there is no link. It is really a localized conflict based on the use of land, the taxes based on use of land. And it is 2 communities that are claiming that the other community being alien, the Bayaka being alien. We met with the governor on Friday, and she explained very well that the Bayaka, according to them, they have been settled in this locality for the past many decades, while the Bateke claim that this is their line, and any alien community might not be intronized as chief in their on their land, or even let alone be buried on their land. So this apparently was the trigger of the conflict. The point is, with the country being very much already at violence and stable, especially in the eastern part, we really fear that this could be become very much go out of hand if not immediately tackled. Over.
Thank you very much. Lisa Schlein, Voice of America.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Now, let's see, there was a surge of this deadly violence in July. And then I gather, I'm not sure though, that that stopped. I mean, the bad conditions continued, but what has instigated the recent upsurge in violence? And then you mentioned that, that you want to put an end, that the government or whoever should put an end to this additional crisis. How do you propose going about that? Thank you.
Angel?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. Lisa, definitely, yes, there was a surge of violence in July, and what is continuing to, there have been skirmishes between the two communities. We were told there was a situation whereby a chief of the considered alien community was buried on the land of the receiving community, and that further sparked the violence, and so they again began to fight each other. And actually, it has not really ceased. Some of us were hoping that this was just another clash, because we are used to intercommunal clashes in this country. But really, the magnitude they are reaching this time around is a little bit, is really worrisome, because the violence is too much, with some of those killed being beheaded and so on. So really, the government, ourselves, we are still involved to really see how best we can tackle the matter. The government indeed is meeting with all the stakeholders, is mediating the conflict. We expect that through this mediation, if there is nothing else involved, which we really hope it has nothing else behind the whole communal clashes, we expect that through the mediation by the government and the faith-based entities, the conflict could find an end pretty soon. But this is really what we hope. So far, it is not yet the case. Over.
Thank you very much, Angela. I don't see other questions for you, so thank you very much for being with us from Kinshasa to update us on these very, really awful clashes and the consequences of them in the region. Let's go now to Ukraine. I have two people who are going to brief us on this. We have a short announcement from Catherine Wissou for UNCTAD and Ravina for OHCHR. Catherine, you are going to have a brief on the impact of the Black Sea Grain Initiative soon. Maybe
oui, bonjour à tous. En effet, la CNUSED va publier très prochainement, je pense d'ici la fin de la semaine, une note sur l'impact de l'initiative sur la mer Noire, sur les activités portuaires, sur les exportations vers les pays en développement depuis l'Ukraine et sur l'impact sur les prix mondiaux. C'est un rapport qui montre combien l'effet de cette initiative a été positif. Ça sera court, c'est un rapport qui fait une dizaine de pages ou un peu moins, avec beaucoup d'illustrations, de graphes, de comparaisons entre les trois périodes qui sont avant la guerre, dans les premiers mois de la guerre et à partir du moment où l'initiative a produit ses effets. Voilà, je vous l'enverrai directement par email. Dès qu'il est disponible, il est en cours d'update sur les derniers chiffres. En tout cas, quelle que soit la date à laquelle il est publié, ça sera vraiment les tout derniers chiffres disponibles sur ces trois volets de l'impact de cette initiative. Merci.
Merci à toi, Catherine. And I give the floor now to Ravina for an update on the human rights situation in Ukraine. Ravina.
Thanks, Alessandra. Good morning, everyone. The missile attacks by Russian armed forces yesterday, which struck cities across Ukraine, left at least 12 civilians dead and more than 100 injured in Kiev, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and in the Kiev and Sumy regions. The location and timing of the strikes, when people were commuting to work and taking children to school, is particularly shocking. We are gravely concerned that some of the attacks appear to have targeted critical civilian infrastructure. Many civilian objects, including dozens of residential buildings and vital civilian infrastructure, including at least 12 energy facilities, were damaged or destroyed in 8 regions, indicating that these strikes may have violated the principles on the conduct of hostilities under international humanitarian law. Damage to key power stations and lines ahead of the upcoming winter raises further concerns for the protection of civilians, and in particular the impact on vulnerable populations. Attacks targeting civilians and objects indispensable to the survival of civilians are prohibited under international humanitarian law. We urge the Russian Federation to refrain from further escalation and to take all feasible measures to prevent civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure. Our human rights monitoring mission in Ukraine will continue corroborating information on civilian casualties resulting from these attacks, as well as documenting violations of human rights and international humanitarian law throughout the country.
Thank you very much, Ravina. And obviously this statement follows the one that we have distributed to you yesterday from the Secretary General, in which he said he was deeply shocked by the large-scale missile attacks by the armed forces of the Russian Federation on cities across Ukraine. You have seen the message that we have sent to you, but it's really important, I think, as the Secretary General stressed, that this constitutes another unacceptable escalation of the war, and as always, civilians are paying the highest prices. I also would like to add that humanitarian, I've got some questions from some of you about our work there. Ravina has just said that the work of the monitoring mission continues, and of course the humanitarian assistance also continues to be delivered to people in desperate need of support, according to our humanitarian coordinator on the ground, Denise Brown, who also expressed her shock at the attacks of yesterday. So let's now go to the question in the room. I start always with the room, RTS. You again.
President Zelensky yesterday at the in front of the UN General Assembly said that Russia is now a terrorist state. He really used these words. And some European officials were really not far from saying the same. What is your reaction to that, and what can you say?
We are very concerned about the series of attacks that took place. It appears to be in a coordinated fashion across Ukraine yesterday. And as I mentioned, that the timing of the attacks, when people were commuting to work, children were going to school, is particularly shocking. The fact that it seems that energy facilities were targeted as well, and some of these facilities may be indispensable to the survival of the civilian population just ahead of the winter months as the weather is getting colder, as we've seen stories of elderly people trapped in their homes, people with disabilities who are also unable to flee. I mean, this is unconscionable. We have to stress that intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, that is, objects which are not military objectives, amount to a war crime. I will not weigh in on that. There's been a lot of language used, and we prefer to stick to the law, to international humanitarian law as well as international human rights law.
Thank you. Jérémy, tu avais une question? No? Okay, so I don't see the question in the room. Let's go to the platform. Lisa.
Hi, I think you've answered my question actually, because you were talking about it violating all kinds of international humanitarian law. So I did want to know whether you thought that this rose to the level of war crimes.
I think yes, she has answered. So let's go to the next question, Antonio.
Hello, I just want to ask if you can send the notes right now. I know you have other topics today, but Ukraine is very urgent. So if you can send right now, thank you.
Sure, Antonio. I think my colleagues are listening, and they should be sharing it very soon.
Any other question to Ravina on this subject? Don't see any, Ravina. So you have two other items for us today on Libya and then on Hong Kong. I don't know which one you want to tackle first.
I'll start with Libya.
Yes.
On Libya, we have a new UN human rights report that will be published very shortly. I apologize in advance that we were not able to share it under embargo. It was just not possible this time. Widespread and systematic human rights violations and abuses against migrants in Libya are compounded by the lack of pathways to protection within and outside the countries. This means that migrants are often compelled to accept assisted return to their home countries in conditions that may not meet international human rights laws and standards. Migrants are frequently compelled to accept these assisted returns to escape abusive detention conditions, threats of torture, ill treatment, sexual violence, and forced disappearance, extortion, and other human rights violations and abuses. Collectively, these conditions have created a coercive environment that is often inconsistent with free choice. Now, assisted returns are in principle meant to be voluntary. However, the report finds that in reality, many migrants in Libya are unable to make a truly voluntary decision to return in accordance with international human rights laws and standards. Many of them find they have no choice but to return to the same circumstances that made them leave their countries in the first place. Any migrant who is returned to a country that is experiencing adverse drivers and structural factors that compelled people to leave the country, the adverse impacts of climate change and environmental degradation, human rights violations and abuses, armed conflict, persecution, or a combination of these reasons, may end up in an even more vulnerable situation than before. And returnees, those who do end up returning to their home countries, also face additional personal, financial, and psychosocial burdens, including as a result of the severe trauma that they experienced in Libya, in the absence of sustainable solutions to these problems. The report contains testimony from some of the 65 immigrants who were interviewed by our office, who had recently been returned to the Gambia. And I'll quote some of this testimony. They brought me to a prison, but even at that point, I did not think about going back to Gambia. Then they entered the prison with a stick and were beating people like animals. Sometimes they would take your money and your clothes. They broke my teeth, so I accepted return. This is from one of the migrants. Another interviewee said, I had no chance to ask to seek protection in Libya or elsewhere. I was only offered to go back home. Now, since 2015, more than 60,000 migrants in Libya have been repatriated to different countries of origin across Africa and Asia through the assisted return programs, including at least 3,300 Gambians who have returned from Libya since 2017. Our acting UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada al-Nashif, has said that Libya and involved states should take immediate steps to urgently address this untenable, unconscionable situation. Libyan authorities should immediately end all violations and abuses of migrants' rights. Other states too have responsibility here. They need to step up and provide more protection to migrants trapped in Libya by increasing safe and regular pathways of admission to their territories. This desperate situation requires all concerned to ensure that no migrant is compelled to accept assisted return to an unsafe or an unsustainable situation in their country of origin.
Thank you very much, Ravina, for this dire assessment of the situation of the migrants. Lisa has a question for you.
Yes, thanks. Good morning, Ravina. You mentioned the Gambia as one of the countries. What about other nationalities? Are the people, the migrants that are treated in such an abysmal manner, mainly from African countries, or do they also come from other areas of the world? And then is this abuse going on mainly in the official government detention centers, or are they also occurring or mainly occurring in the, I don't know how to qualify it, the unofficial detention centers, which are held by rebels and criminal gangs and so forth? And does a lot of this abuse involve sort of holding people for ransom, kidnappings and so forth? Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. On your question of where these people come from and the ill treatment and whether the fact that they are Black, that they're sub-Saharan Africans has anything to do with it, yes. what we have heard in the testimony that we have received from people we've interviewed is that sub-Saharan Africans suffer particularly bad treatment. Again, using the voices of the people that we spoke to, one of the witnesses of a police anti-migrant raid said, if they saw a Black person, they would just catch you. They demolished homes, locked people up in jail. They were holding 4,500 Black people like dogs. We've heard of very severe ill treatment of people in detention facilities, official and unofficial detention facilities. There have been allegations of human rights violations committed by various state actors, including the Libyan Coast Guard. As you are aware, just yesterday, there was a terrible incident where smugglers are alleged to have burnt a boat full of migrants in Sabrata, where 15 burnt bodies were found. I'm sorry, this was on Friday, the 7th of October, not yesterday. So there's a whole gamut of actors who are there to exploit the migrants, and they are caught, they are trapped in this situation where either they continue to be subjected to these kinds of violations or abuses, or they accept return to their home countries. I think that answers your questions. Thank you.
And I think your colleagues have sent out the notes from Libya. I can see them. Okay, so let's see if there is any other question on the platform or in the room. No. So maybe you can go to your last point on Hong Kong.
Yes, on Hong Kong. We are alarmed by the sentencing on Saturday of another 5 people, 4 of them minors, under the national security law in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of China, the Hong Kong SAR. The UN Human Rights Office and a number of UN human rights mechanisms have repeatedly expressed concerns over the negative impact of the national security law on fundamental rights and freedoms in the Hong Kong SAR. We remind the Hong Kong SAR authorities of their obligations under international human rights law, in particular the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, in Article 37, states that the arrest, detention, or imprisonment of a child shall be in conformity with the law and shall be used only as a measure of last resort and for the shortest appropriate period of time. The UN Human Rights Committee, which oversees the implementation of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, called on the government to take concrete steps to repeal the current national security law and in the meantime to refrain from applying the law. We regret the continued application of the national security law, including against children, in spite of the clear recommendations of the Human Rights Committee. We urge the authorities to bring the Hong Kong SAR's legislation and practice fully into compliance with its international human rights obligations.
Thank you very much. And I see Gabriela has a question.
Good morning. Yes, I have a question, but it's on Iran. So if I wait maybe after...
Okay, yeah, just 1 second. Let me see in the room. Any question on Hong Kong? The situation on Hong Kong, I don't see any hand up. So yeah, is that okay? Pravina? Gabriela, go ahead, ask your question.
Yes, if you have an update of the situation in Iran, I think the protests are growing everywhere. What can you say? Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriela. Yes, we have been following with growing concern the situation in Iran. I'm just looking at the updates sent by colleagues. Protests have been carried out on various scales in all 31 provinces of Iran. We have had difficulty verifying the number of casualties, including in light of the ongoing restrictions to obtaining and accessing information in Iran. According to reports, the use of lethal force against protesters and bystanders has led to the killing of dozens of individuals, including children. But again, we don't have the figures on that. We have also received reports of mass arrests and detentions of protesters and at least 90 members of civil society. This includes human rights defenders, lawyers, artists, and journalists. We have also seen very worrying reports of killings of human rights defenders, and again, it's very difficult to verify the circumstances. So the situation remains even more concerning, and we can only repeat our call to the authorities in Iran to ensure that there is an independent investigation into Mahsa Amini's death, and that the calls of the protesters on the streets are taken, that they take heed of the calls of the protesters rather than using violence and other means and arrests to disperse them.
Thank you very much, Ravina. Other questions to OHCHR? No, I don't see any. So thank you very much for these extensive briefings. And yes, if the notes can be sent as soon as possible, thank you. So let me now give you my final announcements. Let's stay with human rights and to tell you that the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which opened yesterday, its 83rd session, is reviewing today the report of Finland. The Human Rights Committee, which also opened yesterday, is concluding this morning the review of the report of the Philippines, and this afternoon will begin consideration of the report of Kyrgyzstan. The Committee on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights will conclude next Friday afternoon at 5:30 its 72nd session. And this is what I had, and some of you have asked for more information on the election of the members of the Human Rights Council at the General Assembly. It's going to start at 10 a.m. New York time, 4 o'clock here, and the information is on the General Assembly website. If you need, we can send you the link. Otherwise, you can also ask questions to our colleague, Paulina Kubiak, who is the spokesperson of the President of the General Assembly. Those who have written about it, we have answered in writing. If there are other people who need this information, please let us know. I see James has raised his hand. James, you have a last-minute briefing before I finish with my updates?
Thank you so much, Alessandra. Sorry, I just wanted to add to what Ravina had mentioned on Iran, simply because overnight we had a statement from UNICEF's Executive Director, just to reiterate the horrendous nature of these reports of children and adolescents being killed. UNICEF's thoughts, of course, with those families of the killed and injured, and we share in the outrage and shock of all fair-minded people who are seeing these images of girls and women being beaten. As per that statement, UNICEF calls again on the protection of children from all forms of violence and harm, including during conflict and political events. Violence against children by anyone and in any context is, of course, indefensible. Earlier today, I had a message from a journalist just asking on numbers of deaths. As Ravina said, we don't. Many of you will have seen those reports of double-digit numbers of children killed from various human rights organisations. In the current context, it is, of course, extremely difficult to verify those, though most troubling of all is that it may be that the actual death toll of children may be higher than reports suggest. Again, grave challenges in verifying. Once more, I think UNICEF just reiterates, as the Secretary General has, that children and adolescents must be able to exercise their rights in a safe and peaceful manner at all times. Thanks so much, Alessandra.
Thank you very much, James, for reminding us of this statement from UNICEF. I see Lisa has raised her hand. I don't know if it's for you. Lisa?
Yeah, it's for me, and I'm sorry, it's for James, and if Ravina wants to pipe in, that's okay too.
Ravina is still here, so they both listen to you.
Okay, great. And anyway, I'd like to know, James, first of all, you say that the actual death toll of children may be higher than what it says. So what is the official death toll that you have? And how do you think it might be higher? And I was wondering, how young are some of these children who are being killed? And I understand a fair number may be arrested. Is that true? And if so, on what kinds of conditions do they, happens to them? Are they tortured? Do you have any insight about that? And lastly, the statement by your executive director talked about the need to stop what is going on and to protect these children. How do you propose this being done in an authoritarian society such as Iran? Thank you.
James?
Lisa, thanks so much, and I will dovetail and lean on Ravina. deaths, we simply don't read the same reports of whether it's Amnesty International, various human rights group, who point to double-digit number of children and adolescents. I mean, we all know the standard line, one is way too many, double digits. We've seen the images, we've seen children, particularly girls, young women, being beaten as they exercise their rights. So we don't have the numbers. The verification and access is incredibly difficult, and that's equally worrying, of course, as you say, for those children who have been arrested and detained. And I'll defer to Ravina for more on that. In terms of what we propose, Lisa, again, this is around, first and foremost, governments fulfilling their obligations as they've all signed in, like the government has on the Convention of the Rights of the Child and children's freedom to assembly and their right to protest, the right to share their voice. And for that, then we raise our voices and hopefully in unison with those children. Without additional access on the ground, it's very difficult to do more, as it is in Iran and many other places where children, adolescents and young people want to raise their voices on issues. Let me throw to Ravina.
Thank you, James. Yes, very important points for James. I will add, as I said, the number of killings, it has been very difficult for us to verify. What we have is very patchy. In the province of Sistan and Baluchistan, for example, reports indicate that at least 66 people, including children, were killed after security forces fired live ammunition, metal pellets, and tear gas at protesters, at bystanders, after Friday prayers on the 30th of September. But it's very patchy information, so we can't give you full details. What is clear is that children are among the dead. Children are among those arrested. And in fact, there are also reports indicating that a number of high schools in different cities were raided, and school children were arrested inside school premises by security forces. You will also remember that universities had to go online as the protests had begun. And then there were internet shutdowns, intermittent internet shutdowns as well. So to put schools online and then to remove the access for children to actually be able to access their education is, again, there's a dire impact on children overall on the situation in Iran. Like James, I mean, we stand in solidarity and we use our voices to amplify the voices of the children, of the young people who are just asking to be heard. They are asking for the compulsory hijab rules to be lifted. They are asking for investigations and accountability for the deaths of for the death of Masa Amini and now the deaths of others in subsequent protests. And we call on the authorities to heed these calls.
Thank you very much to both of you. Any other question on this subject? I don't see any, so maybe this time I can let you go in. Thank you. So just a few other announcements. Just a reminder that today at 1 p.m. in this room, we will have Professor Petteri Talas, the WMO Secretary General, together with Gauri Singh, International Renewable Energy Agency Deputy Director General via Zoom, but Professor Talas will be here to launch the 2022 State of Climate Services Report, Energy. And of course, you can talk to Brigitte about this press conference. There are a few international days I wanted to mention to you. The first one is commemorated today, is the International Day of the Girl Child. As you may remember, this is the 10th anniversary, 10th annual celebration of this International Day, which calls for a retrospective on the progress made for the girls' rights, listening to girls' continued demands for change and a push for further accountability for girls' rights. We have distributed to you the message of the Secretary General that says that on this anniversary, we celebrate the lives and achievements of girls across the world. Many girls, he says, today face enormous challenges. They may have had their education ended by the COVID pandemic. They may have been forced to their homes by conflict. They may be unable to exercise their sexual and reproductive rights. He said he's extremely concerned by the continued exclusion of girls from schools in Afghanistan. This is deeply damaging to girls themselves and to a country that desperately needs their energy and contributions. I once again urge the Taliban to let girls learn, says the Secretary General. And he concludes by saying, now more than ever, we must renew our commitment to work together so that girls enjoy and exercise their rights and can play a full and equal part in their communities and societies. Investing in girls is investing in our common future. And UN Women is organizing today an event that you can follow online. This is at 9 a.m. New York Times, it's 3 o'clock here, if I'm right. And it consists of girl activists and advocates, which will be coming together to discuss among girl activists, distinguished members of the UN community, and share their perspective and experience in order to have a dialogue with policymakers around progress for girls' rights. Another important international day which is coming up is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. This is coming up on the 13th of October. The UNDRR is launching on that day a report on the global status of multi-hazard early warning system with Loretta Heber-Girardet, the chief of the Risk Knowledge Monitoring and Capacity Development branch of UNDRR. And we also distributed to you the message of the Secretary General, but it's embargoed until 9 a.m. Geneva time on the 13th. And definitely, last but definitely not least, we have another important day coming up, which is the 16th of October. As you all know, this is World Food Day, particularly important this year. And in this particular year, so marked with multiple global challenges, including the ongoing pandemic, conflict, climate change, rising prices, and international tensions, FAO tells us that this is affecting global security. So they have chosen the theme, Leave No One Behind. The World Food Day 2022 campaign calls for global solidarity and collective action to make sure that no one is left behind through the transformation to more efficient, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient agri-food system for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life. FAO, Geneva, and partners are organizing a series of activities to commemorate the day. In fact, during the entire week, there is a program which will be made available to you shortly by FAO Geneva. There is also some details on the FAO in Geneva website. And of course, the global ceremony will take place at FAO headquarters on Friday, 14th of October. There is a registration link Adriano has sent you, and you also have more details on World Food Day 2022 page on the FAO website. I think I've told you everything I had in terms of announcements. If there are no questions to me, and I don't see any, thank you very much. And I hope you will be able to join the 1 p.m. Press conference of WMO in this room. Thank you.
Recording stopped.